As she quietly cleaned one of the mansion's long hallways, she was caught doing something no one expected, and in a matter of seconds, she completely transformed the atmosphere. From that moment on, a silent tension began to grow between two opposing worlds. But just when everything seemed to find its balance, an imposed decision threatened to destroy what was just beginning to blossom. Eleanor Miller sobbed silently as she wiped the large bay window, her tears mixing with the soapy water dripping from her trembling hands. She had just received the call that would change everything. Her mum needed an urgent surgery, and the money she earned as a housekeeper in that mansion in Scottsdale would not be enough in 10 years. At 24, with her fair skin marked by exhaustion and her green eyes clouded with desperation, she felt trapped in a maze with no way out. Her brown hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail, couldn't hide her natural beauty, the same beauty she had learned to hide to avoid problems at previous jobs. The loud slam of a door made her jump. William Anderson, 32, had returned from his business trip earlier than expected. His imposing presence filled the foyer as he took off his designer suit, revealing broad shoulders and a posture that denoted authority. His blue eyes, cold as steel, scanned the room before settling on Eleanor, who was trying to wipe her tears with the back of her hand. His tanned skin contrasted with her nervous paleness, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still in that mansion that had witnessed so much loneliness. "What's wrong?" he asked in a deep voice that didn't allow for evasion. Eleanor turned, startled, and in her distress, she let the cleaning rag fall to the marble floor. Her cheeks flushed red when she realized her swollen eyes gave her away. She had never exchanged more than 3 words with her boss, and now she found herself in the most vulnerable situation imaginable. He watched her with an intensity that unnerved her, as if it were the first time he was truly seeing her, despite the fact that she had been working in his house for 6 months. "It's nothing, Mr. Anderson. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were back," she murmured, bending down to pick up the rag with slightly trembling hands. But William didn't move, his eyes still fixed on her with a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. There was something in the way she maintained her dignity, even in the midst of her pain, that inexplicably disturbed him. At that very moment, a child's shout echoed from the library. "Ellie! Eleanor, where are you? I need help with this problem." The voice of David, William's 8-year-old son, cut through the halls like an arrow that struck directly at the heart of the tension that had formed between the two adults. The boy came running, his golden curls tousled and his blue eyes bright with excitement, carrying a math book that seemed too big for his small hands. William frowned, confused. His son had never shown any interest in school, and the most expensive tutors in Arizona had failed miserably at sparking even a flicker of curiosity in him. "David, what is this about?" he asked, but the boy barely spared him a glance before launching himself towards Eleanor with the naturalness of someone who had found their safe place in the world. "Eleanor is teaching me numbers in a way I can understand," David explained excitedly. "Not like those boring guys Dad hires. She makes math-like stories." Eleanor became even more nervous, feeling the weight of William's gaze on her. She knew she was in trouble. Employees were not supposed to get involved with the family's children beyond what was strictly necessary. "Sir, I was just... the boy asked me and..." she began to explain, but William raised a hand to silence her. There was something about the scene that didn't fit with anything he knew. His son, who hated studying, who hid every time a new tutor arrived, was standing there with bright eyes and a genuine smile, clinging to a book as if it were a treasure. "Show me," he said simply. Eleanor looked at him with surprise, not understanding what he meant. "Show me how you teach my son math," he clarified, and his voice had lost some of its authoritative coldness. There was curiosity there, and something else that Eleanor couldn't identify. With trembling hands, Eleanor took David's book and went to the library table. William followed them, keeping a safe distance, but not missing a detail of what was happening. What he saw completely threw him off balance. Eleanor didn't use complex methods or sophisticated techniques. She simply took abstract concepts and turned them into little stories, into images that David could visualize. She talked about numbers as if they were characters in a tale, about mathematical operations as if they were exciting adventures. "See, if you have 5 cookies and you give 3 to your friends," she explained with a natural sweetness, "you're not losing anything, you're gaining smiles, and smiles are always worth more than cookies." David nodded with enthusiasm, solving problems that just days before had seemed impossible. William stood there, watching in silence, feeling something inside him stir uncomfortably. When the short lesson was over, David hugged Eleanor with the spontaneity of his age. "Thanks, Ellie. You're the best teacher in the world," he said, and then turned to his father with a serious expression. "Dad, can I keep learning with Eleanor, please? She makes everything make sense." William looked at his son, then at Eleanor, and finally fell silent for a moment that felt eternal. There was something about this woman that challenged everything he thought he knew about education, about social classes, about life itself. "I need to talk to you," he said to Eleanor. "In my office. Now." Eleanor felt the ground move under her feet. She was sure he would fire her, and with her mum's situation she couldn't afford to lose this job. She followed William through the luxurious hallways, feeling that each step brought her closer to her ruin. But what she didn't know was that she had just planted a seed in the heart of a man who had forgotten how to feel, and that seed was about to change all their destinies. Chapter 2. William's office was a temple to power and success. Walls lined with books he had probably never read, framed diplomas that certified his business brilliance, and a panoramic view of Scottsdale that constantly reminded him of his privileged position in the world. Eleanor stood by the door, her hands clasped in front of her, awaiting the verdict that would determine her future. Her green eyes avoided meeting his, fixed instead on the polished hardwood floor that reflected the golden light of the sunset. "Have a seat," William said, gesturing to a chair in front of his mahogany desk. His voice had regained some of that business coldness, but Eleanor could detect something different, a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. She sat on the edge of the chair, as if she were ready to run at any moment. The tension in the room was palpable, like electricity before a storm. "Where did you learn to teach like that?" he asked, leaning back in his executive chair and studying her with those blue eyes that seemed to see through people. Eleanor was startled by the question. She had expected a scolding, a threat, even immediate dismissal, but not the genuine curiosity she perceived in his voice. "I didn't learn anywhere, sir," she replied honestly. When I was little, my grandmother taught me everything with stories. She used to say that knowledge without a heart was like a garden without water." Her voice broke slightly at the mention of her grandmother, and William noticed the pain in her eyes. There was something about her simplicity that deeply unnerved him. The phone rang, interrupting the moment. William answered in his usual professional voice, but Eleanor could see his face harden during the conversation. When he hung up, there was a line of tension on his forehead that hadn't been there before. "Trouble at the company," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "There are always problems." "Can I ask you something, Mr. Anderson?" Eleanor was surprised by her own audacity in asking that question. He looked at her with a raised eyebrow, inviting her to continue. "Why is David so lonely? I mean, he has everything a child could ever want, but—" She stopped, realizing she might have gone too far. William was silent for a moment, and Eleanor could see something that looked dangerously like vulnerability crossing his face. "His mother passed away when he was 5, he said finally. "Since then I've tried to give him everything, but apparently it's not enough." There was a bitterness in his voice that spoke of years of guilt and regret. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor whispered, and the sincerity in her voice made William look at her differently. "Losing a parent. I lost my dad when I was little too. I know what it feels like to be surrounded by people, but feel completely alone." For the first time in years, William found himself truly seeing another person, not as an employee or a number on a payroll, but as a human being with her own wounds and stories. "How did you get through it?" he asked, and the question surprised even himself. "You never really get over it," Eleanor admitted, "but you learn to live with the emptiness, and sometimes, if you're lucky, you find people who make that emptiness feel a little less cold." Her eyes met his for a moment, and something passed between them, something neither of them knew how to name. The moment was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. David peeked his head in with a mischievous smile. "Dad, can I have dinner with Eleanor tonight? I want her to tell me more number stories." William looked at his son, then at Eleanor, and realized that in the 6 months she had been working there, he had never seen David so animated. "Eleanor has her own obligations, David," he began to say, but Eleanor gently interrupted him. "If Mr. Anderson doesn't mind, I would love to have dinner with David," she said. "We could do more math exercises afterward." William found himself nodding before he had even really thought about it. There was something about the way she interacted with his son that awakened emotions he had kept buried for years. During dinner, William watched from a distance as Eleanor transformed the room with her presence. David laughed constantly, asked questions, and told stories about his day at school. It was as if life had returned to a house that had been in permanent mourning. Eleanor didn't just listen to David. She truly saw him, valued him as a person, not as the heir to a business empire. "You know what, David?" Eleanor said as she cut her food. "I think you're much smarter than you believe. You just need someone to teach you in your language." David smiled proudly, and William felt something strange in his chest at the sight of his son so happy. After dinner, as Eleanor helped David with his homework, William stood in the doorway watching. He couldn't understand how this woman, without college degrees or academic credentials, had accomplished in a few hours what teams of professionals had failed to do in years. She had brought a smile back to his son, and that was something he had believed was impossible. When David went to bed, Eleanor prepared to leave, but William stopped her. "Wait," he said. "I want to make you a proposition." She turned with curiosity and some worry in her green eyes. "What would you say if I asked you to become David's official tutor?" Eleanor looked at him in surprise. "Mr. Anderson, I don't have a degree. I don't have any credentials. I'm just a—" "You're what my son needs," he interrupted her. "And apparently you're better than all the teachers I've hired." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Besides, I suppose the extra money would be good for you." Eleanor felt tears welling up in her eyes. This opportunity was exactly what she needed to help her mum, but she was also terrified. What did she know about being a tutor to a rich kid? What would happen when he realized she was nothing more than a young woman without a formal education who had learned everything from books she found in the trash? "I don't know if I'm the right person," she murmured. But William took a step closer, and she could smell his expensive cologne, see the small wrinkles around his eyes that spoke of years of heavy responsibilities. "David thinks you are," he said. "And that's the only thing that matters to me right now." There was something in his voice that made Eleanor look him directly in the eyes for the first time. What she saw there surprised her. He wasn't the cold, calculating businessman she had imagined, but a desperate father who would do anything to see his son happy. But what neither of them knew was that the decision that night would unleash a series of events that would test not only their prejudices and fears, but also their ability to love in a world that doesn't forgive social differences. Like a storm approaching silently on the horizon, the forces that would oppose this unexpected union were already moving in the shadows, preparing to defend an established order that Eleanor and William were about to challenge without even knowing it. Chapter 3. 3 weeks later, the Anderson mansion had undergone a transformation no one could have predicted. David ran through the halls with a joy that had been absent for years, carrying books and notebooks as if they were precious treasures. His school grades had improved dramatically, but more importantly, he had recovered that childlike spark that William had feared was lost forever. And it was all thanks to a 24-year-old woman who had turned learning into a daily adventure. Eleanor had blossomed in her new role. She was no longer just the housekeeper who cleaned in silence. Now she had purpose, a voice, and a reason to wake up with enthusiasm every morning. William had set up a small classroom in the library, equipped with everything she could possibly need, although Eleanor still preferred to teach in the yard, under the shade of the oak trees, where David could run and explore while he learned. That October afternoon, as Eleanor explained fractions using flower petals, William watched them from his office on the second floor. It had become a secret habit, these stolen moments, when he set aside multi-million-dollar contracts to watch his son laugh with complete abandon. There was something hypnotic about the way Eleanor moved, graceful like a dancer, her gestures soft yet sure, as she guided David through concepts that had once seemed impossible to him. "Dad, why don't you come down and join us?" David suddenly appeared in the office, his cheeks flushed from the sun and a smile that could light up the whole city. William closed his laptop, realizing he had spent more time watching than working. "I'm busy, David," he replied automatically, but his son wasn't so easily discouraged. "Eleanor says work is important, but family is the most important thing of all," David declared with the wisdom of his 8 years. "And she says you look really tired lately." William looked at his son in surprise. Had Eleanor been talking about him? The idea disturbed him in a strange way, a mix of irritation and something that felt dangerously like hope. "Oh yeah? And what else does Eleanor say about me?" David shrugged innocently. "She says you have sad eyes and that you probably need more hugs." William felt something shift in his chest, something he had carefully kept hidden for years. "Are you coming with us, Dad? Eleanor is going to teach me about the stars." Against his better judgment, William found himself following his son to the yard. Eleanor was sitting on the grass with a small telescope she had borrowed from somewhere and several books scattered around her. Seeing him approach, she quickly stood up, nervously smoothing her skirt. "Mr. Anderson, I didn't expect. If you'd prefer that David and I go inside." "Stay," he said, and the word came out softer than he had intended. "David says you're going to study astronomy." Eleanor nodded, her cheeks slightly flushed. "I thought it would be good for David to understand that we're part of something bigger. Sometimes, when we feel small or lonely, it helps to remember that we're connected to the whole universe." William sat down on the grass next to them, something he hadn't done in years. David immediately snuggled up against him, and William felt a wave of emotion that almost overwhelmed him. When was the last time he had just been present, without thinking about meetings or contracts or responsibilities? "Look, Dad," David whispered, pointing through the telescope. "That's the Orion constellation. Eleanor says it's like a hunter protecting us from the sky." William looked through the telescope, but he found himself more fascinated by the way Eleanor explained the legends behind the constellations. Her voice had a musical quality that turned scientific information into poetry. When he turned to ask David a question, his eyes met William's, and for a moment the world stopped. "Would you like to try it, Mr. Anderson?" she offered, holding the telescope out to him. Their fingers brushed as they exchanged it, and both felt an electric current that neither of them dared to acknowledge out loud. As William looked at the stars, Eleanor watched his profile, noticing the small lines of tension around his eyes, the way his shoulders relaxed slightly in his son's presence. There was something deeply attractive about seeing him like this, vulnerable and human, far from the mask of power he usually wore. "It's beautiful," he murmured, and when he turned back to her, Eleanor wasn't sure if he was referring to the stars or something else. The moment stretched between them like a golden thread, delicate and powerful at the same time. David had begun to doze off against his father's shoulder, exhausted from the day's adventures. William carefully picked him up, and Eleanor hurried to gather the books and the telescope. As they walked towards the house, there was a new intimacy between them, as if they were a real family returning home after a perfect night. "Thank you," William said, as they went up the stairs to David's room. "For this, for him, for everything." Eleanor smiled, and in the soft light of the hallway, William thought he had never seen anything so beautiful. "You don't have to thank me, Mr. Anderson. David is an extraordinary boy. He just needed someone to notice." After tucking David into bed, they stood in the hallway, neither of them wanting the night to end. The tension between them was palpable, charged with unspoken possibilities and feelings that neither dared to name. "Eleanor," William began, his voice huskier than usual. But the words got stuck in his throat. What could he say? That he couldn't stop thinking about her. That she had transformed not only his son's life but his own as well. That every day he eagerly awaited the moment to see her smile. "I should go," Eleanor whispered, but her feet didn't move. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, see the internal struggle reflected in his blue eyes. She knew she was playing with fire, that a man like William could never see her as more than an employee, but she couldn't deny what she felt every time he looked at her that way. William took a step towards her, and then another, until they were so close he could see the tiny golden specks in her green eyes. "Eleanor," he murmured, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. The first kiss was soft, tentative, like a question neither of them had dared to ask. But when she responded, when her lips moved against his with the same contained desperation, everything changed. Years of loneliness, of responsibilities that were too heavy, of repressed emotions, everything came to the surface in that stolen moment, in the hallway of a mansion that had witnessed very little true love. When they finally separated, both were trembling. William rested his forehead against hers, breathing heavily. "I shouldn't have done that," he whispered, but his arms didn't let go of her. "No," Eleanor agreed. "You shouldn't have," but her hands were tangled in his shirt, holding him close. "But I don't regret it." At that moment, neither of them could have imagined that this kiss would be the first of many, nor that it would also be the catalyst that would unleash a series of events that would test everything they thought they knew about love, social class, and the price of happiness. Because in the shadows of the mansion, eyes that shouldn't have seen were watching, and decisions that would change everything were about to be made. The storm was approaching, and Eleanor and William were about to discover that love, no matter how powerful, is sometimes not enough to face a world determined to keep them apart. Chapter 4. The call came on a Tuesday morning as Eleanor was helping David with a science project in the yard. William was in his office reviewing contracts when the familiar voice of Mark Johnson, his most influential partner, cut through the phone line like a steel blade. "Will, we need to talk. Now," Mark had said, and something in his tone sent a premonitory chill down William's spine. An hour later, Mark was sitting in William's office in his impeccable suit and with an expression that mixed disappointment and calculation. Mark Johnson was a 50-year-old man with perfectly slicked-back grey hair who had built his empire on the foundation of image and appearances. For him, every partnership was an investment, every relationship a strategy, and scandal was the mortal enemy of business. "I've received some troubling reports," Mark began without preamble, "about your domestic situation." William tensed immediately, knowing exactly what his partner was referring to, but he decided to play dumb. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mark." "Oh, I think you do," Mark replied with a cold smile. "It's being said that you've become very close to one of your employees, a young woman with no education, no social standing. Will, this is troubling on so many levels." William felt anger beginning to boil in his veins. "My private life is none of your business." "It becomes my business when it affects our business," Mark retorted, standing up to walk towards the window that overlooked the yard, where Eleanor and David were laughing as they built a model of the solar system with recycled materials. "You see this? This is exactly what I mean. That woman is playing you, Will, don't you realize?" "Eleanor isn't playing anyone," William shot back, also standing. "She's been the best thing that's happened to David in years." "And to you too," Mark asked with a sarcastic smile. "Will, listen to me. I have an investment proposal on the table, the biggest of our careers, but my international partners have standards. They expect you to maintain a certain image, a certain level of respectability. An affair with the housekeeper doesn't fit that image." William clenched his hands into fists. "It's not an affair." "Oh, really? Then what is it? Are you going to tell me you're in love with a woman who probably didn't even finish high school? A woman who cleans bathrooms for a living?" The cruelty in Mark's voice was like a slap, and William felt every word as a physical blow. "Eleanor is worth more than any socialite I've ever met," William said in a dangerously low voice. "And if you can't see that, then maybe you don't know me as well as you thought." Mark sighed theatrically. "Will, let's be practical. This woman sees an opportunity, nothing more. A rich widowed man with a son who needs care. She's playing her cards very well, I must admit." At that moment, a clear laugh filtered through the window. David had managed to get his solar system model to work, and Eleanor was applauding him with genuine joy. William watched them, and something inside him strengthened. The purity of the love he saw between that woman and his son was unquestionable. "I'm going to tell you something, Mark," William said, turning to his partner. "Eleanor knows nothing about my finances. She doesn't know how much money I have. She's never asked me for anything. In fact, when I offered to pay her more to tutor David, she almost refused out of pride." "Oh, what a touching story," Mark replied sarcastically. "Will, I know you think she's different, but at the end of the day she's a housekeeper who took advantage of your loneliness and your guilt over Carmen's death." The mention of his late wife was like a stab. William moved closer to Mark, his eyes blazing with fury. "Don't you dare bring Carmen into this. Carmen was a woman of our class, Will, educated, refined, appropriate. She never would have put you in this compromising position," Mark continued, relentless. "What do you think she would think if she saw you now kissing the maid in the hallways of her house?" The blow was direct. William staggered, as if he had received a physical punch. The guilt he had been avoiding for weeks washed over him like a cold wave. Was he betraying Carmen's memory? Was he being a fool manipulated by a woman more cunning than she seemed? "I see you're starting to get it," Mark said with satisfaction. "Look, I'm not a monster. I understand you've been lonely, that you need companionship. But this has to end, Will, for your sake, for David's sake, and for the sake of our business." "And what if I refuse?" William asked, although his voice had lost some of its previous conviction. Mark smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "Then I will have to reconsider our partnership, and the international investors will also have to reconsider their offer." "Are you willing to risk everything we've built for a woman you've known for 3 weeks?" William fell silent, feeling the weight of years of work, of responsibilities, of the inheritance he would one day leave to David. Did he have the right to risk it all for his own feelings? Was he being selfish by putting his personal happiness above his son's future? "I have a solution," Mark continued. "Fire her. Give her a good severance package, a letter of recommendation, and have her leave discreetly. David will get over it. Kids are resilient, and you can get back to focusing on what really matters." "And what is it that really matters?" William asked bitterly. "Power, Will, influence. The ability to provide your son with a future without limitations. What can that woman offer you? Love? Love doesn't pay for elite universities. It doesn't open doors in the best social circles. Love is a luxury that men like us can't afford." At that moment, a gentle knock on the door interrupted the conversation. David ran in, his cheeks flushed with excitement, and Eleanor following him with a radiant smile. "Dad, you have to see what we made. The model works perfectly." David stopped when he saw Mark, and his smile faded slightly. There was something in the atmosphere of the room that told him he had interrupted something important. Eleanor also felt the tension immediately. Her eyes moved between William and Mark, noticing the stiffness in William's shoulders and the cold smile on Mark's face. "Excuse me, Mr. Anderson. I didn't know you had company." David, come on. Let's finish the project in the yard. No, Mark said, standing up. Stay. In fact, it's perfect that you're here. Miss Eleanor Grant, she replied, her chin slightly raised. There was something about the way that man looked at her that put her on guard immediately. Miss Grant, Mark repeated with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I've been talking to William about your employment situation. I think it's time to make some changes. Eleanor felt the ground move under her feet. She looked at William, searching for a sign, some explanation, but he avoided her gaze. Changes? She asked in a trembling voice. William has decided that David needs a more professional tutor, someone with proper credentials, with experience from recognized institutions. I'm sure you understand. The silence that followed was deafening. David looked between the adults with confusion and growing alarm. Dad, is Eleanor going to leave? William finally looked up, and what Eleanor saw in his eyes broke her. It was the look of a man who had made a decision, even if it was killing him inside. David, go to your room. We need to talk to Eleanor alone. No, David yelled, running towards Eleanor and hugging her tightly. She can't leave. She's the best teacher in the world. Dad, please. Eleanor knelt beside David, tears beginning to form in her eyes. It's okay, sweetie, she whispered, although her voice was breaking. Sometimes things change, but that doesn't mean we stop loving each other. Very moving, Mark commented dryly. But I think this would be easier for everyone if we just proceed with efficiency. Eleanor stood up slowly, with David still clinging to her. She looked directly at William, searching in his blue eyes for some trace of the man who had kissed her under the stars, of the father who had played with his son in the yard. Is this what you want? She asked. Is this your decision? William closed his eyes for a moment, feeling as if each word was a nail in his own coffin. When he opened them, he had regained the cold mask of the successful businessman. Yes, he said simply. It's my decision. Eleanor nodded slowly, as if she had been expecting that answer. I understand, she said with a dignity that impressed even Mark. I thank you for the opportunity you gave me, Mr. Anderson, and I promise you that David will never forget what he learned. No, Eleanor, no. David clung to her in desperation. Dad, please, she makes me happy. Without her, I'll be bad at math again and I'll be sad forever. His son's words were like daggers in William's heart, but Mark put a hand on his shoulder, silently reminding him of all the reasons he was doing this. Eleanor knelt down once more beside David, taking his face in her hands. Listen to me, my little genius, she said, in a trembling but firm voice. You are amazing, with or without me. And everything we learned together, that stays with you forever. No one can take that away from you, do you understand? David nodded between sobs, and Eleanor hugged him one last time before standing up. She walked towards the door, but before leaving, she turned to William one last time. I just hope, she said in a barely audible voice, that one day you can look in the mirror and feel proud of the decision you made today. And with those words, Eleanor Grant walked out of the Anderson mansion, taking with her the light that had illuminated those walls for 3 magical weeks. What she left behind was a devastated child, a heartbroken man, and the echo of a possibility that might never present itself again. But Mark Johnson smiled, satisfied. Business could continue as usual, and the natural order of things had been restored. Or at least, that's what he believed. Chapter 5. 2 months later, the Anderson mansion had returned to its previous deathly silence. David had retreated into a sadness that worried even his school teachers, rejecting the 3 tutors William had hired after Eleanor's departure. The boy who had blossomed like a flower in the sun had withered, becoming a silent shadow that roamed the halls like a ghost of his former joy. William was in no better state. Business was going perfectly. The international investment had been finalized, projects were moving forward smoothly, and his bank account was growing every day. But at night, when he was alone in his office with a view of the yard where Eleanor had taught David about the stars, he felt an emptiness that no financial success could fill. He had gained an empire and lost everything that truly mattered. Dad, David said one night as William was tucking him into bed, do you think Eleanor remembers us? The question was like a stab in the heart. William sat on the edge of the bed and stroked his son's golden hair. I'm sure she does, David. Then why doesn't she come to visit us? She always said we were a family. David's voice broke slightly. Was she lying? William closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his decision like a mountain on his shoulders. Sometimes, David, adults make decisions we think are right, but they're not, David asked with the devastating clarity of childhood. I don't know, William admitted. Honestly, I don't know. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the other side of the city, Eleanor was fighting her own demons. She had gotten a job as a teacher at a public school in a working-class neighborhood of Phoenix, where her unorthodox methods were welcomed among children who desperately needed someone to believe in them. The job satisfied her, but it didn't fill the void David had left in her heart, nor did it silence the voices that whispered to her about the love she had lost. Her mom, Sarah Grant, a 50-year-old woman with prematurely gray hair but still bright eyes, had noticed the change in her daughter from the very first day. Eleanor had returned home that terrible October afternoon with red eyes and a broken heart, but she had kept the details to herself, simply saying that the job had ended. "Sweetie," Sarah said one night as they had dinner together at their small kitchen table, "you haven't told me what really happened at that big house." Eleanor looked up from her plate, surprised by her mum's direct question. "I already told you, Mum, they decided to hire someone more qualified to teach the boy." "That's what you told me," Sarah nodded. "But you didn't tell me why you've been crying in silence every night for 2 months. The tears Eleanor had been holding back finally spilled over. "It was more than a job, Mom. David became a part of my heart. And his dad." She stopped, unable to continue. Sarah got up and hugged her daughter, feeling the pain radiating from her like heat from a fever. "Did you fall in love with the man of the house?" Eleanor nodded between sobs. "I know it was silly. I know someone like him could never, but for a moment, Mom, for a moment I felt like we were a real family." "And him?" Sarah asked softly. "Did he feel the same way?" "I thought so," Eleanor whispered, "but I guess I was wrong. In the end, I couldn't compete with his world, with his business, with what was expected of him." Sarah held her daughter as she cried, feeling a mix of anger and sorrow for Eleanor's suffering. She had raised her daughter to be strong, independent, to never depend on a man for her happiness, but she had also seen the light in Eleanor's eyes during those 3 weeks, a light that had completely disappeared. At the mansion, things got worse when David got sick. It wasn't physically serious, but the sadness and loss of appetite had weakened his immune system. William spent sleepless nights by his son's bed, watching the boy who had been the light of his life fade before his eyes. "I want Eleanor," David murmured on one of those nights, feverish and half asleep. "Why can't she come?" The doctor who came to check on David was clear in his diagnosis. "There's nothing physically wrong with the boy, Mr. Anderson. But it's clear he's suffering from depression. Sometimes children process loss very intensely. Has there been any significant change in his life recently?" William didn't answer directly, but that night he found himself standing in front of his office window, looking out at the yard where Eleanor had turned learning into magic. Mark was right about business, about financial stability, about social expectations. But looking at his son sick with sadness, William began to wonder if he had traded his family's happiness for something that, in the end, had no real value. The crisis came a week later, when David completely refused to get out of bed. He didn't want to eat, he didn't want to talk, he didn't want to do anything except sleep. William called the best child psychologists in the city, but David refused to cooperate with any of them. "I just want Eleanor," he repeated like a mantra. "She understands me. She makes everything make sense." It was at that moment that William realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had thought he was protecting his son, securing his future, maintaining appearances, but in reality, he had destroyed the only source of true happiness David had known since his mother's death. That night, William made a decision that he knew could cost him everything. He picked up his phone and dialed the number he had memorized but had never dared to use. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Eleanor, it's William. We need you to come back. David is sick, and I think you're the only one who can help him." The silence on the other end of the line was long and painful. When Eleanor finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "What kind of sick?" "He won't eat. He won't get up. He won't talk to anyone. The doctors say he's depressed." "Eleanor, I know I have no right to ask this of you after what happened, but—" "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she interrupted, and the line went dead. William stood looking at the phone, unable to believe it was that simple. But he knew that nothing about what came next would be simple. He would have to face Mark. He would have to fight against the expectations of his world. He would have to make decisions that could cost him everything he had built. But as he went up the stairs to David's room to tell him that Eleanor was on her way, William realized that he was willing to risk it all, because he had learned the hardest lesson of all, that without love, without a real family, without his son's laughter, all the business empires in the world were worth nothing. The war was about to begin, but for the first time in months, William felt he had something truly worth fighting for. Chapter 6. Eleanor arrived at the mansion in exactly 18 minutes, her hair slightly tousled by the wind, and her heart beating so fast she thought it would burst out of her chest. William was waiting for her at the front door, and when their eyes met, both felt the impact of 2 months of forced separation. He looked haggard, with deep bags under his eyes and a beard that spoke of days without paying attention to his appearance. She, for her part, had lost weight, and there was a sadness in her green eyes that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "He's in his room. He hasn't wanted to talk to anyone for 3 days." Eleanor nodded and headed directly for the stairs, with William following her at a respectful distance. When they reached the door to David's room, Eleanor stopped and took a deep breath before knocking softly. "David, it's Eleanor. Can I come in?" The silence stretched for a moment that seemed eternal, and then they heard a movement inside the room. The door slowly opened, revealing David in wrinkled pajamas, with tousled hair and eyes that lit up as if he had just seen the sun after months of darkness. "Eleanor?" he whispered, as if he couldn't believe she was real. "Is it really you?" Eleanor knelt down in front of him, and David threw himself into her arms with a force that almost knocked her over. Both cried, hugging as if the world would end if they let go. William watched from the hallway, feeling his heart break and mend at the same time. "I missed you so much," David sobbed against Eleanor's shoulder. "I thought you were never coming back. I thought you had forgotten about me." "I could never forget about you, my little genius," Eleanor whispered, pulling back just enough to look at David's face. "You're a part of my heart forever." "Are you going to stay this time?" David asked with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Or are you going to leave again?" Eleanor looked towards the hallway, where William waited with an expression that mixed hope and terror. "That," she said softly, "depends on your dad." The next few days were an emotional roller coaster for everyone. David miraculously recovered in Eleanor's presence, starting to eat again, to laugh, to show interest in his studies. But the tension between Eleanor and William was palpable. They spoke only when necessary, maintained a physical distance, and avoided being alone in the same room. It was Mark who forced the final confrontation. He arrived at the mansion without warning, accompanied by 2 men in suits that Eleanor didn't recognize. He found them in the yard, where she was helping David with a new math project. "Will," Mark announced in a cold voice, "I see you've decided to ignore our agreement." William came out of the house when he heard voices and immediately knew the final battle had arrived. "Mark, I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Clearly," Mark replied with sarcasm. "I'd like you to meet Mr. Johnson and Mr. Williams from the international investment firm. They came specifically to get to know your family situation before proceeding with the final fund transfer." Eleanor stood up immediately, understanding the implicit threat. "David, go inside. I need to talk to your dad and these gentlemen." But Eleanor, "Inside, sweetie, now." David reluctantly obeyed, but Eleanor could see that he hid behind the patio doors, where he could hear everything. The idea of him witnessing what was about to happen broke her heart, but she knew she had no other choice. "Miss Grant," Mark said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "what a surprise to see you here again. I thought we had resolved this situation." "The only situation here," Eleanor replied with more courage than she felt, "is a boy who needs stability and love." One of the investors, Johnson, cleared his throat. "Mr. Anderson, we understand that personal matters can be complicated, but our clients have specific expectations about our partners. Public image is crucial in our line of business." William felt anger growing inside him. For years he had played by other people's rules. He had sacrificed his personal happiness for external expectations. But seeing Eleanor defending David, remembering the joy that had returned to his son's eyes, something broke inside him. "You know what?" William said, taking a step forward. "Your expectations mean very little to me." "Will," Mark warned, "think about what you're saying." "I have thought," William replied, his voice gaining strength. "I've thought for 2 months. I've thought as I watched my son get sick from sadness. I've thought as I realized I had traded my happiness and my family's for the money of some strangers who don't even know me." He turned to Eleanor, and in his blue eyes, she could see the decision he had made. "Eleanor, I love you. I love your intelligence, your kindness, the way you make David laugh, the way you've brought life back to this house. And if these gentlemen can't accept that, then I don't need their money." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark seemed to be in shock. The investors exchanged uncomfortable glances, and Eleanor was breathless. "Will," Mark said in a dangerously low voice, "you're making a monumental mistake." "No," William replied, taking Eleanor's hand. "The mistake was listening to you the first time." Johnson cleared his throat again. "Mr. Anderson, we understand this is emotional for you, but you must understand that our investors—" "Your investors can go to hell," William interrupted, "and so can you." "In that case," William said finally, "I'm afraid we can't proceed with the investment." Perfect, William replied. I don't need it. Mark looked at William as if he didn't recognize him. You're destroying everything we've built. No, William said, squeezing Eleanor's hand. I'm building something new, something real. After Mark and the investors left with barely veiled threats about consequences and future business relationships, William turned to Eleanor. His hands were trembling slightly, but his voice was firm. I know I have no right to ask this of you, after what I did, he began. I know I hurt you, I hurt David. I probably destroyed any trust you had in me. But Eleanor, I love you. I love you in a way I never thought was possible. Not just for what you do for David, but for who you are. For your strength, your intelligence, your huge heart. Tears were streaming down Eleanor's cheeks. William, let me finish, he continued. I can't promise you that it will be easy. We'll probably lose contracts. Probably some friends will turn their backs on us. But I can promise you that I will never again choose money over love. I can promise you that I will fight for us, for this family we've formed, every day, for the rest of my life. At that moment, David ran out of his hiding place and launched himself towards them, hugging them both. Does that mean Eleanor is going to stay forever? William looked at Eleanor, waiting for her answer with his heart in his throat. She looked towards the mansion that had been her workplace, then her home, then her heartbreak, and finally her chance at happiness. She looked at the man who had chosen love above everything else, and at the child who had given her life purpose. Yes, she whispered finally. Yes, I'm going to stay. The kiss that followed was different from the first one they had shared in the hallway. This one didn't have the tentative curiosity of new love, but the deep passion of love that had been tested and proven true. David clapped and shouted with joy, and for the first time in months the Anderson mansion was filled with the sound of genuine happiness. 6 months later, in a simple ceremony in the yard where Eleanor had taught David about the stars, William Anderson and Eleanor Grant were married. David was the best man, carrying the rings with the pride of someone who had helped create that family. Sarah, Eleanor's mum, cried with joy at the sight of her daughter radiant in a simple but beautiful dress. Business, as Mark had predicted, suffered initially. Some contracts were lost, some doors were closed. But William discovered that without the pressure of maintaining an image that wasn't really his, he could be more creative, more innovative, more true to his values. New opportunities arose, partnerships with people who valued character over class, and slowly but surely he built an even more successful empire than before. David blossomed as never before. With Eleanor as his official stepmom, he became a brilliant student who helped other children with their studies, using the same methods of storytelling and patience she had taught him. The house was filled with laughter, with science projects, with family dinners where they actually talked to each other. And Eleanor, the young woman who had started as a housekeeper with big dreams, became something more powerful than she had imagined. She became the heart of a family, a mother, a beloved wife, and living proof that true love can triumph over any social obstacle. At night, when David was already asleep, William and Eleanor would sit in the yard and look at the stars. Sometimes they talked about their plans for the future. Sometimes they simply stayed in silence, grateful for the path that had led them to each other. Do you ever regret it? He asked her one night. All that you had to face to be here? Eleanor smiled, the same smile that had captivated his heart from the first day. You know what I tell David when he asks me about difficult decisions? What do you tell him? I tell him that the best things in life always require courage, and that true love isn't easy, but it's always worth the fight. William kissed her softly, tasting the truth in her words. They had fought for their love. They had paid a price for choosing heart over convenience. But in the end, they had gained something invaluable. A real family built on love, respect, and the unshakable foundation of knowing that they had chosen correctly. In the distance, the lights of Phoenix shone like earthbound stars, and in the yard of the Anderson mansion, 3 people who had found a home in each other continued to write a love story that would prove that sometimes, just sometimes, love really can conquer all.